Madeline Royce wanted to be adored, remembered, envied, and Evan Collins was the perfect pawn in her plan. But just hours after their picture-perfect wedding, Evan vanished without a trace, and the bride's carefully curated fairy tale began to unravel into a calculated nightmare. Madeline Royce had always believed in picture-perfect endings. She grew up in a quiet Oregon suburb where love stories felt more like folklore than reality. As a teenager, she filled journals with sketches of her future wedding dress and dream home. But no one had ever told her how cruel love could be when it turned sour. Her romance with Aidan Lark had started like a dream. Movie dates, vacations, handwritten letters. They lasted 6 years, and every friend and family member expected a wedding announcement. Instead, Madeline received silence. Aidan vanished from her life one chilly December morning without warning. His number stopped working. His apartment was cleared out. He didn't block her on social media. He deleted himself entirely. It was like he'd erased their entire history with the swipe of a finger. For months, Madeline unraveled in private. She went through every message, every memory, looking for signs. Friends told her to move on, but her heart refused. She created burner accounts to check if Aidan resurfaced online. She even drove 3 hours to his hometown hoping to see him at his favorite bar. But there was nothing, just a void where love used to live. Eventually, the pain hardened into something else: bitterness, then obsession, and finally strategy. She realized she didn't want closure. She wanted revenge. When Evan Collins entered her life, Madeline didn't fall for him. Not at first. Evan was the quiet type, a software developer who lived alone, kept a small circle, and had no social media footprint. They met at a birthday party for a mutual friend. He laughed at her jokes, remembered her coffee order, and sent flowers after the second date. He was safe, steady, predictable, everything Aidan never was. Evan fell in love fast, and Madeline allowed herself to follow. Not because she loved him, but because she saw something in him, a chance to win out a year into their relationship. Evan proposed during a quiet weekend in Seattle. He got down on one knee in front of the Space Needle while a tourist nearby snapped a blurry photo. Madeline beamed as she accepted, but it wasn't Evan's joy she cared about. That night, she curated a series of engagement photos, including that tourist snapshot. She wore her happiest smile, posed with the ring, and made sure the background was recognizable. The caption read, "To the one who stayed. Forever starts now." She set it to public and tagged the location. Then she waited. Hours after the post went live, she saw what she was looking for. Aidan's old username popped up in the views. Her hands trembled. He was still watching, still lurking, and now he knew she had moved on. Madeline told no one about this. Not Evan, not her friends. But inside, it felt like she had scored the ultimate win. What no one could see was how tightly she was clinging to the past. Madeline began planning a wedding not with joy, but with purpose. She hired the best photographers, picked the trendiest venue, paid extra for drone footage. Every decision was calculated for impact. When people asked about Evan, she smiled and recited the lines every bride says. But in her mind, she was already imagining Aidan scrolling through the wedding feed, feeling the sting of regret. Evan, kind and trusting, saw none of this. He talked about honeymoon destinations, asked about floral arrangements, and told everyone he was the luckiest man alive. Madeline nodded and agreed. After all, she had what she wanted: an audience, a stage, and the perfect ending written in gold foil invitations. But beneath the lace and champagne, a storm was forming. Madeline didn't realize that stories built on vengeance don't end with happily ever after. They end with missing persons reports, flashing cameras, and questions no one wants to answer. And for Evan Collins, the biggest day of his life was also the last time anyone saw him alive. The wedding was held on a warm Saturday in late June at an ivy-covered estate just outside Portland. Everything unfolded like a scene from a bridal magazine. Rows of white chairs stretched across a perfectly manicured lawn. Strings of fairy lights hung from the trees. Guests whispered about how stunning Madeline looked in her fitted silk gown and how lucky Evan was to have found someone so radiant. From the outside, it was the kind of wedding people envy, choreographed, polished, and steeped in charm. Evan stood at the altar with his groomsmen, smiling nervously. He had spent the morning writing last-minute vows in a notebook. Madeline arrived fashionably late, gliding down the aisle as a violin quartet played. Her smile was unwavering. Her eyes scanned the crowd not for Evan, but as if searching for someone else. When they exchanged vows, she kept her voice steady, never faltering, even when Evan's voice cracked with emotion. The crowd cheered as they kissed. A drone captured the moment from above, swooping over the estate like a bird recording proof of their union. The reception began with laughter and champagne. Guests danced under lanterns. A photo booth printed strips of happy faces. Madeline made several wardrobe changes, each dress carefully selected to draw attention. She floated from table to table, hugging relatives and posing for endless photos. Evan, meanwhile, remained close to his friends, drinking slowly and talking more quietly than usual. He laughed, but it didn't quite reach his eyes by midnight. The crowd had thinned. Older relatives left. The music faded into softer background tones. The newlyweds were supposed to head to their suite, but Madeline lingered on the dance floor, chatting with the photographer, ensuring every moment was documented. She wanted the night to live online forever. When someone asked where Evan was, she shrugged. Probably getting some air, she said by morning. Evan Collins was gone. At first, no one panicked. The groomsmen thought maybe Evan had fallen asleep somewhere else after too much wine. The hotel concierge confirmed he'd last been seen heading toward the lobby bar around 12:30 a.m., still in his tuxedo. But when housekeeping entered the honeymoon suite at 9 a.m., the bed was untouched. Evan's wallet was on the dresser. His phone was plugged in. His shoes were beside the door. Everything was where it should have been, except him. Madeline called the front desk. Then she called Evan's best friend. Within 2 hours, everyone was looking. Staff searched the grounds. Security reviewed footage. Guests were questioned, but the cameras only showed him entering the bar. No footage showed him leaving. It was as if Evan had vanished into thin air. Madeline appeared distraught. She cried in front of the staff, asked for privacy, and gave a brief statement to police when they arrived. She said Evan hadn't expressed anything unusual, hadn't been upset or distant. She insisted he was excited for their honeymoon to Greece. But the detectives noted something strange. Madeline didn't ask about search procedures or whether foul play was suspected. She asked if this meant the wedding photos would still be released. By day 2, local news picked up the story. Groom vanishes hours after wedding, read the headlines. Images of Evan and Madeline beaming at the altar were shared alongside maps of the venue and pleas for information. Strangers on social media offered theories: a runaway groom, a staged disappearance, even a love triangle gone wrong. But behind the scenes, police were already piecing together details that didn't add up. Evan's phone had no recent messages after 12:04 a.m. His last text had been to his sister, simply saying, "Call you tomorrow." I did it. And then, nothing. By the end of the third day, the smiles captured on their wedding day felt like shadows of something much darker. A celebration turned into a mystery. And for Madeline, the perfect story she had crafted was now slipping out of her control. The investigation into Evan Collins' disappearance quickly turned from a missing persons case into something far more serious. By the fourth day, detectives had combed through every inch of the wedding venue. Cadaver dogs were brought in, nearby woods were searched, and the estate's pond was dredged, but no signs of Evan surfaced. The estate owners cooperated fully, handing over hours of security footage, employee logs, and guest check-ins. Investigators meticulously tracked every step Evan had taken that night, until 12:37 a.m., when he entered the bar. After that, the trail went cold. Detectives started focusing on Madeline. Something about her statements felt rehearsed. She had a timeline memorized, often repeating herself word for word. She cried when the cameras were on, but seemed composed when they weren't. One detective noted in his report that her concern felt mechanical, not maternal. She wasn't asking questions about what could have happened. Instead, she was already planning to return to her apartment, even as the search for her husband continued. When police requested her phone, she reluctantly handed it over. A digital forensics team dug through her data. On the surface, her messages to Evan appeared affectionate, supportive, exactly what one might expect from a newlywed. But in a hidden, encrypted folder on a cloud backup, something disturbing surfaced. Hundreds of screenshots of Aidan Lark's social media, dating profiles, even a few images taken of him at a coffee shop without his knowledge. She had been monitoring him for over a year. The folder was labeled Resolution. Among those screenshots were private messages between Madeline and a man named Nolan Pierce. At first glance, Nolan seemed to be a freelance photographer. He had an Instagram page filled with gritty black and white portraits. But detectives ran his name and found a longer history. Nolan had once been a licensed private investigator, but his license had been revoked after allegations of stalking and extortion. He had prior arrests for breaking and entering, harassment, and assault. And according to the messages, Madeline had hired him 3 months before the wedding. Their exchanges were vague but unsettling. She asked questions like, "Can you watch someone without them knowing? And what if he tries to back out last minute?" In one message dated just 10 days before the wedding, she wrote, "I don't want anything messy, just enough to scare him. He needs to go through with this." Another message said, "Don't leave a trace. This has to look like his choice." Police quickly linked Nolan to the wedding venue. Witnesses remembered seeing a man who didn't fit the wedding crowd. Older, unshaven, wearing a hotel staff uniform. Surveillance footage from a side entrance confirmed his presence around 1 a.m., walking toward the utility hall near the bar where Evan was last seen. When investigators cross-referenced the hotel's staffing records, they found no one by that description scheduled to work that night. An arrest warrant was issued for Nolan Pierce, but he had vanished. His last known location was a Motel 2, towns over, where he paid in cash and checked out the morning after the wedding. Inside his room, left behind, was a torn piece of wedding invitation paper with Madeline's name on it, along with a used burner phone that still had one active contact: her. When detectives confronted Madeline with the findings, she denied everything. She claimed she had hired Nolan only to track down someone who owed her money and had no idea he was at the wedding. But her story kept changing. First, she didn't know Nolan's real name. Then, she said he had stalked her. Later, she admitted she paid him in cash just once, despite messages showing several transactions. The police now had 2 working theories. Either Nolan acted alone, driven by money and opportunity, or Madeline orchestrated the entire thing, using Nolan as her tool to control a narrative gone wrong. Either way, Evan Collins wasn't missing anymore. He was presumed dead, and the fairy tale wedding had officially turned into a criminal investigation 0.6 days after the wedding, as public interest in the case exploded and news outlets replayed. Smiling wedding footage on a loop, a hotel maintenance worker made a call that shifted the investigation. The worker, assigned to check a persistent foul odor near the hotel's service corridor, had stumbled upon something he couldn't explain. Behind a locked maintenance door, one usually reserved for emergency storage, he noticed a slight crack in the tile floor and a sharp smell of decay. The room had been used for years to store broken equipment and old furniture, and few employees even had keys to it. That morning, he used a master key to investigate. Inside, under a collapsed utility shelf, lay a thin slab of disturbed concrete. Some of it was fresh, poured clumsily, and still brittle at the edges. A single towel poked out from underneath. Fearing the worst, the worker called hotel security, who in turn called the police. Within hours, the area was sealed off with yellow tape. Cadaver dogs were brought in again, but this time there was no need for speculation. Investigators broke through the slab with hammers and found Evan Collins' body beneath it, wrapped in monogrammed hotel towels, his hands bound behind his back, and a contusion on the side of his head. His wedding ring, still on his finger, was stained with blood. The autopsy revealed that Evan had died from blunt force trauma and suffocation. There were no defensive wounds, which meant he was likely ambushed. There were signs of restraint. Plastic zip ties left imprints on his wrists and ankles. Toxicology showed no drugs or alcohol in his system beyond what had been consumed at the reception. He was sober, alert, and fully aware in his final moments. The footage from that night was re-examined frame by frame. At exactly 12:38 a.m., Evan was seen entering the bar alone. 10 minutes later, a man in a maintenance uniform followed. Though his face was partially obscured by a cap, height, gait, and posture matched one person, Nolan Pierce. At 1:05 a.m., a shadow was captured in the utility hallway. Evan was never seen again. With confirmation of Evan's death, the case was now officially a homicide. An all-points bulletin went out for Nolan. His fingerprints were found on the door, handle and towel. Police also recovered a receipt from a gas station 2 towns away. Nolan had bought gloves, bleach, and duct tape just hours before the wedding. It was premeditated, no longer just a disappearance. This was murder, carefully plotted and coldly executed. The hunt for Nolan Pierce lasted 2 more days. He was found in a rundown motel in Spokane, Washington, hiding under an alias. He had shaved his head, burned his clothes, and was using cash only. Police raided his room and found Evan's watch and a burner phone containing only 3 contacts. One of them, listed simply as M, had exchanged dozens of messages in the weeks leading up to the murder. That number belonged to Madeline Royce. Nolan was arrested without incident. Under intense interrogation, he initially denied knowing Evan, but the evidence was overwhelming. Cornered, exhausted, and offered a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony, Nolan confessed. He admitted that Madeline hired him to scare Evan into staying in the marriage. She was terrified Evan would back out, ruin the wedding, and humiliate her in front of everyone, including Aiden. According to Nolan, she said the wedding had to happen no matter what. When Evan got cold feet after the reception and said he wanted to leave her, Madeline gave the order, make it permanent. She had paid Nolan $15,000, half before the wedding and half promised after. He used the hotel's back-in trance, lured Evan into the utility area, and knocked him unconscious. He said he panicked when Evan started to wake up and made the decision to kill him. The final piece of evidence sealed the case. A deleted message recovered from Madeline's phone. Just make sure no one finds him before the photos go up. It was dated the night of the wedding. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat, their cameras waiting outside for a glimpse of the woman at the center of the case that had gripped the nation. Madeline Royce entered in a beige suit, her once polished image now replaced by the cold, hollow presence of someone exposed. The headlines had followed her from the beginning, bride or black widow, from aisle to alibi. But none of them captured the full weight of what had unfolded. She had orchestrated a wedding not for love, but for leverage, and now she stood trial for the murder of her own husband. The prosecution built their case methodically. They painted a portrait of a woman obsessed with control, fueled by revenge, and willing to manipulate anyone to preserve her image. They walked the jury through the timeline, showing photos of the wedding and then the crime scene. They played Nolan Pierce's full recorded confession, his voice flat as he described how Madeline promised him the second half of the payment once Evan was gone. The motive was clear. Evan had started to see through the illusion. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, he had confronted her about her lingering fixation on Aidan Lark, her ex-boyfriend. He had even threatened to call off the ceremony. That wasn't something Madeline could allow. Witnesses confirmed Evan had been anxious in the days before the wedding. His sister testified that he had expressed doubts about the relationship. He felt watched, she said, as if someone was always listening. A forensic expert demonstrated how Madeline had used hidden spyware to monitor Evan's texts and emails, tracking his every move. Friends of Madeline were also called to testify, revealing how she spoke of marriage not as love, but as a symbol of winning. One friend recalled Madeline saying, "If Aidan sees me in a white dress before she does, I win. That's all that matters." But it was Aidan Lark's testimony that delivered the most shocking blow. Called by the prosecution, Aidan walked the jury through his sudden disappearance from Madeline's life. He explained how she became increasingly possessive and erratic, tracking his movements, creating fake profiles to message his new partners, even sending veiled threats. He eventually cut all ties, fearing for his safety. He told the court, "I didn't leave her to hurt her. I left to survive her." A collective chill swept through the courtroom. The defense tried to argue that Madeline had been manipulated by Nolan Pierce. They claimed Nolan acted independently, interpreting vague instructions as a green light for murder. But the jury wasn't convinced. The digital footprint was undeniable. Her searches, her messages, the payments, every piece pointed back to her. She had planned it all. After a week of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and solicitation. Nolan Pierce, having accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony, was sentenced to life without parole. Madeline was given 35 years to life, with no chance of parole before serving the minimum. She showed no emotion when the sentence was read. In the months that followed, the wedding footage was removed from every platform. The estate where the ceremony had taken place was forced to close temporarily due to public backlash.